there is a letter. Written by Niccolò Machiavelli on the night of December 31, 1502, from a small room in the coastal town of Senigallia. He wrote it to his employers in Florence, the Ten of War, the council that managed the Republic's foreign affairs. He wrote it fast, in the clipped precise prose of a man trying to get words onto parchment before his hands stop shaking. The letter says this: that Cesare Borgia had invited 4 of his most powerful military commanders to a reconciliation meeting. That they had arrived. That within hours of their arrival, all 4 were in chains. And then, in the line that historians have quoted for 5 centuries, Machiavelli wrote, "In my view, they will not be alive tomorrow morning." He was right. 2 of them were strangled that night. The other 2 followed weeks later. The instrument of their death was a violin string, the preferred tool of Cesare's personal executioner, a man named Michelato Carella, who had been with Cesare since the beginning and who understood his employer's requirements without needing to be told twice. Machiavelli heard it happen. He was in the same building. He went back to Florence 6 days later and spent the next decade trying to understand what he had witnessed. The book he eventually wrote about it, The Prince, became the foundational text of modern political philosophy. What happened in those 3 months in the Romagna, between October 7, 1502, when Machiavelli arrived at Cesare's court in Imola, and January 18, 1503, when he finally left, is one of the strangest and most consequential meetings in the history of Western thought. And it begins not with philosophy. It begins with a conspiracy. 3 months. That's how long Machiavelli spent watching Cesare Borgia up close. Close enough to hear men being strangled through a wall. What he saw in those 3 months changed political philosophy forever. But before any of that happened, Cesare was in the worst crisis of his career, surrounded by enemies who were supposed to be his allies. Subscribe, like the video, and let's go back to the moment everything almost fell apart. June 1502. Cesare had just pulled off something that looked, from the outside, like magic. Urbino, one of the most cultured and admired cities in Italy, governed by Guidobaldo da Montefeltro, a man who was Cesare's friend and ally and who had lent him his own artillery, had fallen in a single night. Not because Cesare besieged it. Because he tricked it. He asked Guidobaldo for the use of his troops on the pretense of a joint military operation, then marched those same troops straight into Guidobaldo's undefended capital. Guidobaldo fled in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on his back. It was brilliant. It was also exactly the kind of thing that makes your allies start wondering if they're next. Because they were right to wonder. Cesare's condottieri, the military commanders who ran his armies, had been watching his expansion with growing unease. These were men like Vitellozzo Vitelli, who controlled the strategic city of Città di Castello. The Orsini brothers, who commanded some of the most feared troops in central Italy. Oliverado da Fermo, who had taken power in his own city by inviting his uncle, who raised him as a son, to a banquet and having him killed along with all the city's senior officials. These were not men who frightened easily. But Cesare frightened them. In September 1502, they met secretly at a villa called La Magione near Perugia. 8 of the most powerful military men in central Italy, sitting around a table, agreeing that if Cesare Borgia was not stopped he would devour them all. One of them said it plainly: "If we do not act now, we risk being swallowed one by the dragon." They signed an agreement. They would move against Cesare together. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Cesare had a spy in the room. He knew about La Magione within days. And here is where it gets interesting. Because what Cesare did next was not what you would expect from the most feared man in Italy. He panicked. This is the part that Machiavelli's admirers tend to skip. The part where Cesare Borgia was genuinely, demonstrably afraid. The conspiracy stripped him almost completely. His condottieri controlled most of his military forces. Without them, he had a fraction of the army he needed to hold the state he had built. The towns of the Romagna began to revolt. Urbino and Camerino returned to their previous lords. Fossombrone rose up. Cesena wavered. The state that had taken 3 years to build was visibly dissolving. Cesare pulled back to Imola and locked himself inside it. He sent desperate messages to his father in Rome for money and troops. He sent diplomatic messages in every direction, to Venice, to Florence, to Louis XII of France, to anyone who might help. He also sent messages to the conspirators themselves, assuring them of his continued goodwill, promising rewards if they remained loyal, performing a friendliness he absolutely did not feel. And on October 7, 1502, into this particular storm at this particular moment, Niccolò Machiavelli arrived. He was 33 years old. He was the secretary of the Florentine Chancellery, a senior official but not a senior diplomat. Florence sent him because they wanted intelligence, not because they thought the situation warranted their best man. His instructions were explicit: offer nothing, promise nothing, commit to nothing. Watch, report, come home. Machiavelli arrived at Imola expecting to find the beginning of the end of Cesare Borgia. What he found instead was something he spent the rest of his life trying to explain. He found a man who was losing, and who was, in the act of losing, teaching Machiavelli more about power than 30 years of academic study ever had. They met the same day Machiavelli arrived. The meeting was at night. Cesare almost always worked at night, a habit that the sources record consistently. The messengers arriving and departing in darkness, the candles burning until dawn, the court operating on a schedule that inverted the rhythms of the ordinary world. He received Machiavelli in a room lit by a single lamp and launched immediately into a complaint about Florence's behavior toward him. A precise, detailed, controlled complaint that communicated both his anger and his complete awareness of exactly how much leverage he had over the republic he was complaining to. Machiavelli sat across from him and watched. He watched Cesare's face. The way it gave almost nothing away. The way a silence could mean a dozen different things depending on what came after it. He watched the hands, large, still, with the particular quality of hands that were never idle even when they weren't moving. He watched the eyes. He is secretive and taciturn, Machiavelli wrote to Florence the next day. Then suddenly loquacious. Then silent again. There is no predicting which one you will find. What Machiavelli was describing, what he was trying to find words for in the dispatches that formed the raw material of the prince, was a man who used unpredictability as a weapon, who understood that an opponent who cannot read you cannot prepare for you, who had turned the management of other people's uncertainty into a form of control. Over the following weeks, Machiavelli watched Cesare do something even more extraordinary. He watched him rebuild. The money came from Rome, Alexander VI, his father, liquidating church assets to fund his son's survival. New troops arrived. The French sent reinforcements. Slowly, the military balance that the conspiracy had upended began to shift back. Slowly, the conspirators who had signed the agreement at La Magione began to look at each other across the table of their alliance and wonder if the others were having the same private conversations with Cesare that they were. Because Cesare was having private conversations with all of them. Each conspirator received messages assuring him of Cesare's personal goodwill. Each was given reasons to believe that the others were already negotiating separately. Each was told, subtly, that the man who moved first toward reconciliation would receive the best terms. The coalition that had terrified Cesare 6 weeks earlier, 8 powerful men who had agreed to act together, began to dissolve. Not because Cesare defeated it. Because he made each man inside it too frightened of the others to trust them. Paolo Orsini arrived in Imola in late November carrying a signed reconciliation agreement from the other conspirators. Machiavelli watched this happen from across the room and wrote home, "This duke is more than human." He did not mean it as a compliment exactly. He meant it as an observation about a kind of intelligence he had not previously encountered and did not have adequate vocabulary to describe. December 1502. Cesare had his reconciliation agreement. He had his money. He had his new troops. He had broken the conspiracy without fighting a single battle. Now he needed to make sure it could never happen again. He sent the conspirators orders. They were to march south along the Adriatic coast and secure the town of Senigallia for him. A straightforward military task, the kind of assignment that a commander gives to troops he trusts. Oliverado da Fermo went ahead and took the town. The others followed. Cesare left Cesena on December 26 with only a single company of personal guards. He divided his main army into separate units, each marching independently, spread across the landscape. He was showing his commanders that he trusted them, that he was comfortable, that he posed no threat. Machiavelli was traveling with the column. He wrote that he could feel something in the air, that everyone around him sensed something was coming but no one could say precisely what. On December 30th, Cesare's columns converged on the roads leading to Senigallia. The conspirators rode out to meet him. Vitellozzo Vitelli, Oliverado da Fermo, Paolo and Francesco Orsini. They embraced him. They rode with him into the town. They went with him to a palace where Cesare said he wanted to discuss plans for the next campaign. They walked inside. Cesare followed them in. Then he turned around. And at a signal, a single, small, agreed-upon gesture to Michelato Carella, the doors closed behind all of them and armed men appeared from every shadow in the room. It was over in seconds. Vitellozzo Vitelli, who had sworn to kill Cesare personally if he ever got close enough, spent his last hours begging Cesare to ask the Pope for an indulgence that might spare his soul from divine punishment. He was afraid of what came after death more than he was afraid of the death itself. Alvarato da Fermo, who had killed his own uncle to take power, wept and blamed Vitelli for everything. Both of them were strangled that same night. New Year's Eve, 1502. The violin string of Michelato Corella. Machiavelli heard it. He was in the building. He wrote his letter. In my view, they will not be alive tomorrow morning. Then he sat in his room in Senigallia on the first day of 1503, and thought about what he had just witnessed and began, somewhere in the back of his mind, in the part where books are written before they are written, to understand what he was going to do with all of it. He went back to Florence 18 days later. He would not see Cesare again for 9 months. When they met again in Rome in October 1503, everything would be different. Cesare's father would be dead, the new pope would be his enemy, the state would be dissolving. The man Machiavelli had watched rebuild an empire from inside a locked fortress in Imola would be trying to survive the one thing he had never prepared for. But that is the next episode. What matters now is what Machiavelli carried back to Florence in January 1503. Not a political treaty, he had been instructed to offer nothing and had offered nothing. Not a military alliance. Not even a clear answer to whether Florence was safe from Cesare's ambitions. What he carried back was a question. A question that would take him 10 years to answer in writing, and that the answer to, published in 1532 5 years after Machiavelli's own death, would be called The Prince, and would be denounced as the work of the devil and praised as the foundation of modern political thought, and would be read by every person who has ever sought to understand how power actually works rather than how it is supposed to work. The question was this. If a man does everything wrong, lies, betrays, executes his own allies, rules through fear rather than love, and produces a state that is genuinely more just, more stable and more livable than anything that existed before him, then what exactly has he done wrong? Machiavelli never fully answered it. He spent his life turning it over. Cesare Borgia had given him the question on a cold night in Imola in 1502, between dispatches and silences and the particular expression of a man who was losing and rebuilding and calculating and performing, and somewhere behind all of it, thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. And somewhere in that building in Senigallia on December 31st, a violin string had provided the punctuation. The question was going to outlast everything, including Cesare.